come together and sing. Praise the Lord, praise the Lord. When we all come together, it's a beautiful thing. Praise the Lord, and sing, sing, sing together and sing, sing, sing together. And all God's people come together and sing. Praise the Lord, when we all come together, it's a beautiful thing. Praise the Lord, and sing, sing, sing together and sing. We can sing together, whatever our differences be. And when we join our voices, we sing as one, we sing as one, we sing in unity. Let all God's people come together and sing. Praise the Lord, when we all come together, it's a beautiful thing. Praise the Lord, and sing, sing, sing together and sing. Friends have gone before us to sing in the heavenly choir, but we can join their praises and sing as one. We sing as one to lift God's praises high. Rejoice, 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 rejoice. Lift up your song to celebrate. Rejoice in the Lord again, I say. Let all God's people come together and sing. Praise the Lord, when we all come together, it's a beautiful thing. Praise the Lord, and sing. Come together and sing. Hallelujah. Come together and sing. Hallelujah. Come together and sing. Hallelujah. All God's people come together and sing.
Today's text, Luke 6:39 through 49, comes after Jesus has descended the mountain to the level plain, healed, blessed, declared woes, preached love of enemies, and now he concludes by telling a series of parables. They address questions to the listener that the listener might have about the life of discipleship. Today's text is rich in its resources for contemplation on the active life of discipleship, as we'll soon see. Please follow along as I read. He also told them a parable. Can a blind person guide a blind person? Will not both fall into a pit? A disciple is not above the teacher, but everyone who is fully qualified will be like the teacher. Why do you see the speck in your neighbor's eye, but do not notice the log in your own eye? Or how can you say to your neighbor, "Friend, let me take out the speck in your eye," when you yourself do not see the log in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your neighbor's eye. No good tree bears bad fruit, nor again does a bad tree bear good fruit. For each tree is known by its own fruit. Figs are not gathered from thorns, nor are grapes picked from a bramble bush. The good person out of the good treasure of the heart produces good, and the evil person out of evil treasure produces evil. For it is out of the abundance of the heart that the mouth speaks. Why do you call Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and do not do what I tell you? I will show you what someone is like who comes to me, hears my words, and acts on them. That one is like a man building a house, who dug deeply and laid the foundation on rock. When the flood arose and the river burst against that house, but it could not shake it, because it had been well built. But the one who hears and does not act is like a man who built a house on the ground without a foundation. When the river burst against it, immediately it fell, and great was the ruin of that house.
Us wisdom and understanding. Kathy just read Luke's description of Jesus teaching 3 parables, and you did a fine job at that. The first describes Jesus stressing the need for self-examination, the kind of fearless inventory that we can make on ourselves that we need to do before we presume that we can help, others. And then Jesus presents the idea that fruit is the natural byproduct of a good tree. And we're to hear, by correlation, as disciples, if we are good disciples with good stuff inside, we will bear good fruit. And then finally, Jesus concludes with a third parable, urging his disciples to take his words seriously, to practice them, to put them into action. So that's it in a nutshell. I'm tempted to end the sermon right there on these 3 points. Examine yourselves, bear good fruit, and take Jesus' words seriously. Amen. I fully expected some of you to break out in applause. Shortest sermon ever. You didn't do it because you know that there's really, that isn't enough. That isn't the right way to treat a parable or 3 parables in this case. Because if we strip down a parable to, well, what's the point? What are the points, right? Then they lose the power to transform us. Typically, we're not transformed, our minds are not renewed simply by PowerPoint slides with points. And that's the power of story. Jesus knew this, parable, story. Jesus knew that it's through the story, it's through imagining ourselves in the story that we can create and envision a new way forward for ourselves. So it's by identifying with the characters in the story that we have the hope of being transformed. And so this story has the power, these 3 stories, these 3 parables have the power to change us by pulling us in. We Americans are living quite the story right now, aren't we? How well are you weathering the storms and gales of late? I know that some of you are protesting. You protested yesterday at SpaceX. You seem to have a good time of it too there. Mary and Becky, and I think there's a few other, all right, Sheila and Frank. Yeah, I had to scratch out what it said above Trump there. The tests of time and our response to them are different for each of us, just as each of us has a unique amount of time left to look at the world, as John Rutter so eloquently urges us to do in his anthem by the same name. What comes to mind when you think of tests of time? Political upheaval? How about asking for bread and being given stone? Perhaps it's finding your identity in a job that's long since lost its meaning. How about relationships that once sustained you but now have changed or ended altogether? Perhaps it's the stuff that makes you question the health of your own soul or even the existence of God. Tests of time can do this. Mother Teresa confessed in her writings about the absence of God in her own life. Mother Teresa. And even Jesus himself cried out to God from the cross, "Why have you forsaken me?" Talk about a test of time. So there's that. Tests of time can take many forms. Dementia, or the fear of it. Your heart suddenly stopping and you're all alone. The loss of those nearest and dearest to you. That'll do it. And then, of course, there's stress. Stress, which can find its source in so many things, right? From everything from the melting polar ice caps to the treatment by our country right now of the suffering poor, of the deported, of the homeless, of the now jobless, the war-weary, and the destitute millions. Oh, let's not forget that nagging question in the background of all of our minds. When will I die? How much more time do I have? And what will it feel like when I'm taking my last breath? We celebrated Jerry Bell's life this past Friday. She died peacefully on the couch, eating ice cream and drinking a soda. Yeah, if you got to go, that's a pretty good way to go. During a recent dinner meeting at the Manse, one of the older retreat planners in my living room prefaced her comments by saying, "For those of us who are up there in age and whose lives could end at any moment," that got our attention. She went on to say, "It's important to consider at camp the issues that we're facing also." So true, right? If I had my way, I'd eliminate all tests of time, everything from chronic pain and cancer to dictators and the fear of evil people. Yet, having been through many tests myself, I've learned so much in those painful and frightening times that I could never have learned had my life remained, my dad used to say, copacetic, comfy, easygoing. And I bet I'm not the only one that can relate to this. Perhaps you lost your job. When you look back on your life, the tests of time of your life, maybe it was losing a job, maybe your marriage failed, or your children misbehaved, or something else that drove you to your knees in prayer, desperately asking God to change my life. Change my life. You might have even bargained with God. God, if you do this thing for me, I'll do anything you ask. There's a mysterious, powerful, loving, and frightening divine presence that can appear out of nowhere. And this presence transcends all our ideas about it. It transcends all our language for calling it to our side in times of trial. This mysterious presence speaks to me in the most unexpected ways. I sensed it powerfully during recent memorial services, especially as the family got up to speak and to share. I felt a nudge, I would call it a divine nudge, while I was sitting there in my house there watching the SAG Awards, and it got to the point where they showed the in memoriam, and I was shocked. These actors who I grew up as a child, admiring and looking up to, and were a part of my life, and they're gone. I can't believe they're gone. I don't know what all has influenced this, but I feel like the Spirit is also at work in me, and it hit me particularly hard, and it left me with a growing awareness that my own seasons are numbered, and I don't have forever to look at the world, to pay attention to the seasons. And looking out at y'all, neither do you. Yet change isn't easy. You know, stop and smell the roses. It was great. This past week I was walking out to the parking lot, and there was a family who I did not recognize, and they were the little girls there and the father, and they were taking close-up pictures of all the flowers. And I thought, how wonderful. Who's a nature lover? I said, oh, it's a school assignment, you know. Change isn't easy. To have that mindset, no, it's life that we need. The reason for stopping and breathing and taking note and listening and looking is this is our precious life, and it won't go on forever on this side of heaven. But change, change. How do we change? How do we change our habits? Reading a great book right now called Atomic Habits. Highly recommend it. It's helping. I've been on a diet now for 2 weeks. Going strong! But I'm telling you, it's a rough slog. Especially when day after day I've been so good. But then I look in the mirror for good fruit. Like Jesus says, you know, get good inside, you should bear good fruit on the outside. And all I see is naked and barren body. It's got a long way to go. You know, it's humbling to realize how undisciplined my personal life has been over the past couple of years. And I'll confess, I've gotten wrapped up in all the excitement and challenge of our church's revitalization efforts. This is a time in our nation's history when de-churched or church alumni, that they are more in number than new members coming in. They're outpacing the church new members that come in to replace those who pass away, and then some. Well, despite how often death has come to our circle of love in recent years, we're actually growing, and we actually are revitalizing. To God be the glory. But we're swimming upstream. Our culture does not support what's happening here. They want to segregate all the generations, give them labels, and don't ever intermix. And we're stronger together, we know it. I wish you could have been there if you weren't last night and watched all the different ages and all the different people dancing and having a great time. The question remains, how are we as individuals withstanding the tests of time? I think our church is doing fairly well. And the answer, I guess, depends, right, I suppose, on how naked we're willing to get in front of the mirror of our souls. It takes great courage to step on the scale of judgment, to listen to Jesus as he bruises our ego in order to correct our vision. So how are we doing, really? Are our lives bearing good fruit, juicy fruit, ripe and nutritious? Are we bearing low-hanging fruit? You know, the kind that others can benefit from easily? And if Jesus' claim is correct, that we are known by our fruit, how's your reputation these days? What are you known for in your family, in your friends, in this community? And how will you be remembered? Truth is, most of us never get rid of our blindness altogether, and we stumble because of it, and we bear less fruit because of it, and we put Jesus' words into action less because of it. So how do we get rid of the log in our eyes? I mean, talk about a test of time. How do we get the log out of our eyes? I suppose it begins by those of us who think we see clearly, humbling ourselves and acknowledging that maybe, just maybe, Our claims to certainty are part of the problem. It's part of what causes us to be blind. Could it be, I'm just saying, could it be that we've developed a cheap confidence in our understanding of what's really happening in the Bible, what's really happening in our country, in our world? We can easily be fooled into thinking that, hey, we understand it, we get it, we have a clear view of how things really are. We can think that until the tests of time come out of nowhere and can get us to the place where we even question our own faith. But here's the good news, and you want to hear that, right? When circumstances beyond our control test us to the core, they can actually function, and this is divine, mysterious work, where the broken road can lead to good. They can actually function as a spiritual wood chipper. A spiritual wood chipper, flinging wood chips here and there, helping us to see more clearly. Now, taking a wood chipper to your eyes, that can be excruciating. But it's so necessary in order for us to see clearly. And it's painful, and that pain can come in many forms, can it? Some feel the pain deep in the soul. There's an absence of God. God, how can you forsake me now? That's no fun. And then, of course, there are the well-meaning friends like the friends that Job had. Remember those? They aren't much help either. Why? Not because they're not trying. No, it's because there's an impenetrable solitude that happens when you're in the ultimate tests of your life. And it's your journey to travel and no one else's. Nobody can do your work. Nobody can do my work for us, right? The divine wood chipper is running, and it has our name all over it. And the only way out is through it. Through the wood chipper. It's only natural to wonder in times of testing, is this some divine punishment, Lord? Have I done something to warrant this? But don't be fooled by that wonderment. That's just the ego making a sly move. Our egos like to think that we're in control. And if it's something I did, then maybe there's something I can do to get myself out of this, right? But so often it's something that just happens, and we can't make heads or tails of it, and it has nothing to do with, well, if I pass the test, Lord, will then it change? Or when I endure enough punishment, then will it change? John of the Cross, a 16th century monk, was best known for his work, The Dark Night of the Soul. He began writing it during the 11 months he spent, 11 months, in a monastery prison. Did you know monasteries had prisons? Some of you did, because you were traveling in Europe and you went down into the dungeons, right? It's bizarre. Can you imagine our church having a dungeon? Well, John was so small in stature that when he met Teresa of Avila, she called him half a friar, which I think is hilarious. And they were both Carmelites and members of a religious order. And this order was founded on the ideals of solitude and silence and prayer. So Teresa founded the monastery of St. Joseph of Avila, 1562. She knew her reform movement would fail unless she involved monks. So she began praying for a male ally who could help her reform monasteries for men. John of the Cross was her answer to prayer, 27 years younger than she, and he became her willing apprentice. Soon they founded the first house of a new Reformed Carmelite order for men. And their success got them into trouble. Can you imagine? The Carmelites, who opposed all their reforms, were very upset. John's superiors told him to quit his job at the convent. He refused, and he became an outlaw in his own order. On the night of December 2nd, 1577, men broke into John's room at the convent and abducted him along with another friar. And they led these guys blindfolded. Can you imagine? There was a time in history when this kind of stuff happened. And they beat them and they threw them into the monastery prison where they survived on just bread and water. It's crazy. He wasn't even allowed to bathe. He wasn't allowed to change his clothes. Now, those who are going to camp or have been, camping for 3 days, 4 days, that we're talking months here. Imagine. He wasn't permitted to leave his cell except for what they called circular discipline, where other monks would flog him. You know what flogging is? It's that handle with a leather strap and sharp pieces of metal and glass that they stuck into the back of Jesus and ripped out the flesh before he was crucified. Yeah, that's what they did to him. By other monks, religious people. Crazy things religious people will do. After 2 months, John was placed in solitary confinement, where the only light that he saw was through a crack in the prison wall. And it was there that he began to compose his greatest works. Now, he didn't have a pencil and a pen. He had to put them to memory in the dark. But eventually he was able to write them down thanks to a kind jailer. And then he was able to escape 9 months later. And he fled to the south of Spain, where Reformed Carmelites were freer from persecution. And there he continued to write down what he learned in the dark. Darkness gets a bad rap. A lot of powerful things happen in darkness. A lot of powerful things happen on the broken road. A lot of powerful things happen in the tests of time. For John of the Cross, the dark night is a love story, full of the painful joy of seeking the most elusive lover of all, God. If you were to ask John of the Cross, well, who is God? He would say, I have a name for God, nada. Nada? God is not a thing, he says. And since God is not a thing, God cannot be held on to. God can only be encountered as that which eclipses the reality of all things. How does anybody come up with that? Well, John did it. John gained the insight in the darkest, dank prison for 9 months. I think this is the gift of the dark night of the soul. I refer to it as the wood chipper, but also the test of time. And what's the gift? The gift is liberation, freedom. It's about feeling free from all of our limited constructs of who God is, free from our fears of God, free from all the attachments to the benefits that we've been promised if we believe this or that about God, free even from this desperate need through spiritual practices to get us closer to God. It's the gift of looking into the soul's mirror and seeing perhaps how far we've strayed from our heart's true desire. This is necessary before we can bear good fruit, Jesus seems to be saying. This is necessary before we can put the words of Jesus into action. Like it or not, the divine, mysterious presence comes to us on God's terms. One of my favorite authors, Barbara Brown Taylor, who's written a wonderful book about learning how to walk in the dark and totally repurposes that concept of darkness, which I'm glad to see that word redeemed, especially for our African American members, who've actually spoken to me about how hard it is to hear these words darkness in a negative light. Negative light. There I go. Here we go. Barbara Brown Taylor. It is not that I expect to hear an actual voice, but I have courted the beloved long enough to know what it is like to receive a divine visit. It is like coming home after a long time away. It is like being held by someone with all the time in the world. It is like remembering a dream that opens a door.